Welcome back to Legacy Revenge. My name is Maya Sterling. I am 26 years old, and 2 weeks ago at my father's annual charity gala for Sterling Manufacturing Industries, the mystery investor who had just purchased his entire factory from bankruptcy, stepped onto the stage to accept a plaque of gratitude. My father Arthur was mid-speech when the buyer arrived, microphone trembling in his hand, tears in his eyes because he believed this stranger had saved 300 jobs in 53 years of family legacy. The buyer walked through the curtain into the spotlight. The room of 400 people fell silent. Then my father's jaw dropped so hard I thought I heard it hit the podium. The mystery investor who had purchased Sterling Manufacturing for $7.2 million cash, who had saved every single employee without firing a single person, who had signed the papers anonymously through a holding company named Apex Climate Solutions, was standing on that stage wearing the same blue work coveralls he had worn to every family dinner for 18 months. His name was Ryan Miller. He fixed air conditioners for a living. Or at least that was what my parents believed. And that night, as the entire room rose to their feet to applaud him, my father slowly raised his hand in mid-applause, then stopped completely, frozen like a photograph, staring at the man who had just become his new boss, his son. And the only reason my father was not standing in an unemployment line, but this moment did not happen in isolation. To understand why a father stood frozen in horror instead of pride on the night his family was saved, we have to go back 18 months earlier, to the day I brought Ryan home to meet my parents for the first time, and everything went exactly as badly as you imagine it did. I grew up in the shadow of Sterling Manufacturing, a mid-sized HVAC components factory that my grandfather founded in 1968, and my father had run since 1995. Our family name was painted in gold letters above the front entrance. Our town, mill town of Harlow Creek, Ohio, existed almost entirely around the payroll that company generated. Every local business, every school fundraiser, every church repair, somehow traced its funding back to Sterling. Being a Sterling meant something in Harlow Creek. It meant country club memberships, front row seats at high school graduations, and a permanent assumption that your future was secured by legacy rather than effort. My father was the kind of man who wore pressed white shirts even on weekends, who spoke about hard work while having never once changed his own oil filter, who referred to the employees as his people, while knowing perhaps 12 of their actual names. My mother was worse. She was the woman who had planned her daughter's life before I was born according to a checklist of social requirements. That included private kindergarten, cotillion lessons, and eventually a marriage to someone whose last name carried equal or greater weight than ours. She measured human beings the way jewelers measure diamonds, by clarity, cut, and carat weight of social capital. Into this world of manufactured perfection, I introduced Ryan Miller on a Tuesday evening in May of last year. Ryan was 28 years old. He drove a 2014 Ford pickup truck with a dent in the passenger door. He owned a small business called Miller Climate Control that employed 3 other men, all of them burly types, with tool belts and calloused hands, who installed residential heating systems. He had graduated from community college with an associate degree in mechanical technology. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom house that he was slowly renovating himself on weekends. And when he smiled at me across my parents' dining room table, the way he always smiled, with eyes that crinkled at the corners and a slight dimple on his left cheek, I knew he was the kindest, most honest, most quietly brilliant man I would ever meet. My parents saw none of that. They saw the truck. They saw the associate degree. They saw the work boots he politely removed at the door, leaving scuff marks on their imported Italian tile. What followed was the most excruciating dinner of my entire life. The dinner lasted 47 minutes. I counted every one because time moves differently. When you are watching someone, you love being dismantled piece by the people who are supposed to love you. Ryan had arrived 15 minutes early, bearing a bottle of wine my mother accepted with 2 fingertips and immediately set aside, replacing it with something French that cost 4 times as much. He wore a button-down shirt he had clearly ironed himself because there were creases near the collar that would have driven my father's dry cleaner to tears. He shook my father's hand firmly. My father returned it loosely, looking past Ryan's shoulder at the television mounted in the corner. He complimented my mother on the meal. She said it was nothing special, which was a lie she often told to make guests feel inadequate. By the time the appetizer arrived, a soup made of roasted butternut squash that I knew my mother had spent 6 hours preparing, the interrogation had begun. My father asked what Ryan's father did for a living. Ryan explained that his father had passed away from lung cancer when Ryan was 19. My father nodded sympathetically but followed up by asking whether his father had been a smoker or whether there was some genetic component they should be aware of. Ryan handled it gracefully. He asked about my father's business, the manufacturing plant, showing genuine interest in how the HVAC components were fabricated. This was a mistake, because my father interpreted any curiosity about his company as either espionage or pandering, and he responded with a dismissive wave of his hand that suggested the complexities of industrial engineering were far beyond the comprehension of a man who fixed air conditioning units in suburbia. My mother waited until the main course rose duck with a cranberry reduction that Ryan praised sincerely to launch her offensive. She asked about Ryan's education. He mentioned community college. She tilted her head and said, "And before that? Private school?" "No, public. And your undergraduate degree?" "Associates in applied science." Her smile thinned like paper dissolving in water. She then shifted to the financial realities of marriage, a topic she approached with the delicacy of a forensic accountant conducting an audit. "Ryan," she said, setting down her fork, "Maya has certain expectations that come with being raised the way she was. The country club membership, the annual trips. The children will need to attend proper schools, not public institutions." I watched Ryan's expression remain steady, but I saw his hand tighten around his wineglass, knuckles whitening. "Mrs. Sterling," he said gently, "I understand your concerns. I want you to know that I care very deeply for Maya. I have a successful business. I am not wealthy, but I am solvent. I work hard, and I plan to work harder to build a good life for both of us." That answer should have satisfied anyone with functional emotional intelligence. It only inflamed my mother further. She looked at me across the table with an expression that communicated a single sentence. Asterisk, "Is this really the best you could do?" Asterisk, my father cleared his throat and delivered what I now recognize as the final blow. The moment where Ryan's fate in this household was sealed permanently. "Son," he said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the tablecloth, "Sterling women have a standard, a lineage. Maya's great-grandmother was a DuPont on her mother's side. We do not marry down. We do not dilute the bloodline with tradesmen." The silence that followed was absolute. Ryan set down his fork. He looked at me, and for a fraction of a second I saw hurt flash across his face, raw and real, before he replaced it with calm. "Mr. Sterling," he said, voice level, "with all respect, Maya is not bloodline. She is a person. A person I intend to spend my life making happy. If that happiness doesn't align with your standards, then perhaps we have different definitions of success." Dinner ended 11 minutes later. Ryan left without coffee, without dessert, without another word from my father. My mother kissed my cheek at the door and whispered, "He won't last, sweetheart. Men like that never do." I closed the door behind him and went upstairs and cried for an hour. What my parents did not know, and what no one in that house would learn for 18 more months, was that Ryan Miller drove away that evening carrying a burden heavier than the shame of their rejection. He drove away carrying a secret that would, in due time, bring my father to his knees not in anger, but in gratitude, confusion, and a humility so profound it rewired every belief he held about class, worth, and what it means to succeed. After that dinner, things between my family and Ryan settled into an uneasy armistice. He remained civil whenever forced to interact with them at holidays, weddings, or funerals. He remained unfailingly polite to my mother. Even when she corrected his pronunciation of Pinot Noir at Thanksgiving, he continued to show up to Sunday dinners bearing side dishes he prepared himself, ignoring the fact that my mother would replate them into nicer serving bowls before they reached the table. My father treated him like furniture that had been delivered incorrectly, unavoidable, but invisible whenever possible. Through all of it, Ryan never complained to me. Not once. Not when my mother suggested during Christmas that maybe we should have a smaller wedding since his family couldn't possibly afford anything appropriate. Not when my father handed Ryan a business card for a job opening at the plant's loading dock, implying that if Ryan wanted respect, he should earn it sweeping floors under men half his age. Ryan took the card, thanked him sincerely, and later framed it on the wall of his office where nobody would see it for another year and a half. We got engaged 6 months after that dinner, on a rainy October afternoon in the Botanical Gardens downtown. Ryan proposed with his grandmother's ring, a simple band that had belonged to 3 generations of working-class women, and when I said yes, he lifted me off the ground and spun me in circles while old ladies on nearby benches clapped and pretended they weren't crying. That same evening, we sat my parents down in the formal living room, the one with the antique furniture no one was allowed to sit on, and told them the news. My mother's face went blank for approximately 3 seconds, before rearranging itself into something approximating enthusiasm that fooled absolutely nobody. My father stared out the window at the azaleas. "When is the wedding?" my mother asked, her voice tight. "Next June, 18 months away." "Oh good," she said. "That gives us time to manage expectations." I squeezed Ryan's hand under the table. He squeezed back. The next 6 months passed in a blur of planning sessions where my mother tried to commandeer every decision, and Ryan deflected each one with patience. I found increasingly mysterious. She wanted a guest list of 300. Ryan suggested 50. She wanted black tie. Ryan suggested garden party casual. She wanted a string quartet. Ryan mentioned a friend of his who played acoustic guitar. Every compromise ended with my mother retreating to her bedroom to breathe into a paper bag and mutter about settling and what the neighbors would think. Meanwhile, strange things began happening at Sterling Manufacturing that nobody connected to Ryan at the time, but which in hindsight read like the opening movements of a symphony. No one else had the sheet music for. The first sign came in late February. Ryan began coming home later than usual from work, sometimes 9, 10 o'clock at night. When I asked, he said he had picked up several large commercial contracts, office buildings, apartment complexes, industrial facilities that required installations outside normal hours. I believed him because Ryan had never lied to me about anything, ever. But I noticed changes in his appearance. New dress shirts appearing in the closet, higher quality than the ones he usually bought. A briefcase sitting in the entryway of our apartment that I had never seen before, containing documents he told me were spec sheets for a big commercial bid. Phone calls he took in the garage or on the porch, speaking in tones I didn't quite recognize, of commanding, using terminology that seemed slightly beyond the scope of an HVAC Contractor's vocabulary. Once, I overheard him say the phrase acquisition, target valuation, followed by hold through shell, corporation, and non-disclosure until Q3. When I asked about it later, he smiled and kissed my forehead and said, "Big project, baby. You'll find out soon enough. Promise me you'll trust me until then." I promised. Because trusting Ryan was the easiest thing I had ever done, easier than breathing. My parents, meanwhile, were imploding, and they had no idea it was about to get exponentially worse. In April, Sterling Manufacturing received news that sent shockwaves through Harlow Creek and the surrounding counties. The company's largest long-term customer, a major automotive parts distributor based in Detroit, announced they were shifting their supply chain to overseas manufacturers effective January of the following year. That single contract represented 42% of Sterling's annual revenue. Overnight, the numbers stopped making sense. Payroll became a calculation of survival rather than routine. My father, who had steered the company through recessions and market shifts with the confidence of a captain who had never encountered a storm he couldn't navigate, suddenly looked tired in a way I had never seen before. He stopped going to the country club. He started arriving at the factory at 5 in the morning and leaving after dark. My mother canceled her bridge group and began taking Xanax again. At Sunday dinners, conversation dwindled to weather updates and awkward silences, punctuated by the clinking of silverware. In May, the first round of layoffs happened. 47 workers, mostly from the assembly floor, given severance packages that my father assured everyone would be temporary. By June, it became clear they were not temporary. By July, the number climbed to 112. My father stopped sleeping. My mother started drinking earlier in the day. The conversations in the house turned grim and sharp. Money was the only topic that existed anymore. Where would cuts come from next? Which product lines were salvageable? Whether the bank would extend the credit line again? Whether the word bankruptcy was finally going to leave the realm of abstraction and enter the reality of the Sterling family name. Throughout this descent, Ryan remained a constant, stable presence. He attended every family dinner. He listened to my father rant about suppliers, labor costs, market forces beyond his control. He refilled glasses without being asked. He helped my mother carry dishes to the kitchen. He never offered unsolicited advice. He never said, "I told you so." He simply showed up, week after week, being exactly who he had always been, the man in the work boots fixing the air conditioner in my parents' hallway when it broke in August, sweating through his shirt while my father sat in his leather recliner, reading the Wall Street Journal and complaining about the timidity. I noticed that Ryan was also quietly helping in ways that were invisible unless you looked closely. He arranged for a wholesale supplier he knew to provide raw materials to Sterling at cost for 3 months, calling it a professional courtesy between colleagues. He recommended to efficiency consultants, both of whom implemented changes that saved the company roughly $80,000 quarterly. He reviewed Sterling's website and digital presence pro bono, redesigning the e-commerce interface in ways that increased direct-to-customer sales by 34%. When I asked how he knew these consultants, how he had these connections, he shrugged and said he had met them through trade associations. I believed him, because believing Ryan was my default setting. My parents thanked him perfunctorily, treating his contributions as the useful assistance of a loyal dog who had retrieved a thrown stick. Pleasant, expected, unworthy of deeper acknowledgement. The strain on my relationship with them grew unbearable. My mother began dropping comments about postponing the wedding indefinitely, until things stabilize. My father stopped acknowledging Ryan's existence altogether, walking past him as if he were a lamppost. Twice, I caught my mother on the phone with friends describing Ryan, as that nice young man who fixes things. You know, very sweet, very adequate for Maya's current phase. I started avoiding their calls. I started spending more time at Ryan's little house, watching him renovate his kitchen cabinets on weekends, wondering why I felt safer in a home with unfinished drywall and paint swatches taped to walls than I did in the polished mausoleum I had grown up inside. By September, the situation at Sterling had become critical. The bank issued a formal notice of default. Pending if outstanding. Loans were not restructured within 60 days. 2 more suppliers put Sterling on cash-only terms. The union representative appeared at my father's door with a letter signed by 217 remaining employees demanding transparency about the company's solvency. My father sat at the head of the dining room table one Tuesday night, surrounded by spreadsheets and profit and loss statements, looking older than I had ever seen him look, and said quietly that if a miracle didn't arrive by December, Sterling Manufacturing would close its doors forever. 300 families, 53 years, an entire town's economic identity evaporated into ink on closure papers. My mother cried silently into her napkin. I looked across the table at Ryan, who was studying the documents with an intensity that seemed unusual for a man whose expertise ended at thermostat calibration. He looked up, caught my eye, and gave me the smallest nod, barely perceptible, like a secret passing between us in a crowded room. I didn't understand it yet, but I felt something shift, deep in my chest, like tectonic plates realigning beneath the Earth's crust. Something was coming. Something enormous. I just didn't know what. October arrived with cold winds and colder banking decisions. My father spent most of the month in meetings with lawyers, creditors, and potential buyers, vultures, as he called them, privately circling the corpse of Sterling Manufacturing, hoping to strip it for parts, sell the land for warehouse development, liquidate the machinery for scrap value. One offer came in for $4 million, conditional upon immediate termination of all employees within 30 days. Another offered $6 million but required moving operations overseas. Your father is under unimaginable stress. The family reputation is fragile. Marrying a man of Ryan's station at a time like this would signal to the community that we have lost control, that we are settling, that we are no longer Sterlings in the way that matters. I stared at her. What are you suggesting? Within 18 months, both offers represented fire sale prices for assets worth nearly triple on a healthy balance sheet. Both offers meant the end of everything the Sterlings had built. My father rejected them both, but I could see the light dying behind his eyes each time he hung up the phone. It was during this period that my mother delivered the ultimatum that would define the next chapter of my life and reshape my understanding of what loyalty actually meant. She invited me to lunch at the country club, the same place where I had taken my first ballet lesson, learned proper table manners, and absorbed every lesson about who I was supposed to be. Command over salads neither of us ate. She laid out her terms with surgical precision. Maya, she said, adjusting her napkin. The wedding cannot proceed under these circumstances. She sighed, a long exhale of practiced disappointment. I'm suggesting you postpone indefinitely. Let Ryan down gently. Explain that the timing is catastrophic. Perhaps later, when things improve, if you're both still available. I felt the blood drain from my face. Mom, I'm not breaking up with Ryan because Dad's factory is failing. Her jaw tightened. This isn't about the factory, Maya. This is about the fact that you are about to make a mistake that cannot be undone. You are marrying down. You are diluting your potential. You are choosing comfort over ambition, stability over excellence. And you are doing it at the exact moment when this family needs you to present a united front of strength, not weakness. I stood up, left money on the table. walked out to my car, sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, shaking with rage and grief. Then I went home to Ryan and told him everything. He listened without interruption, held my hands while I cried, and when I finished, he wiped my cheeks with his thumb and said something I would remember for the rest of my life. "Baby," he said softly, "they're wrong about me. But they're also wrong about themselves. And pretty soon, everyone's going to see exactly how wrong. Can you trust me a little longer?" I said yes, always yes. November passed in a blur of escalating crises at Sterling. Another 37 layoffs, a supplier lawsuit, an investor pulling out of a tentative agreement, the bank extending the deadline by only 2 weeks. And through it all, Ryan disappeared more frequently. Late nights, early mornings, briefcases filled with documents, phone calls conducted in hushed voices on the porch. I stopped asking questions because I realized the answers would come when Ryan decided I was ready. And the way he looked at me lately with tenderness mixed with something like anticipation, like a child holding a wrapped present on Christmas Eve, told me that whatever he was building toward, it was big. Bigger than I imagined. Bigger, maybe, than my parents' entire universe. The invitation to the annual Sterling Charity Gala arrived in early December. Every year, my father hosted this event at the downtown convention center, raising funds for local charities while simultaneously polishing the Sterling brand as pillars of community philanthropy. 400 guests, local dignitaries, press coverage, speeches, plaques, photographs. Usually, it was a celebration of success. This year, it had been reframed as a tribute to resilience, a final salute to a company, and a family facing extinction. The invitation noted that a special announcement regarding the future of Sterling manufacturing would be made. At the conclusion of the evening's program, everyone assumed it would be a farewell. Everyone assumed it was goodbye. I assumed my parents would cancel my engagement to Ryan publicly if they got the chance. IRSVPD, for both of us anyway. Ryan checked his calendar, frowned, checked his phone, and said, "Yeah, I can make that work. Actually, yeah, that'll work perfectly." The way he said it made the hair stand up on my arms. Something was about to happen. I could feel it vibrating in the air between us, like electricity before a storm. The gala was held on a Saturday evening, the second Saturday of December, in the grand ballroom of the Harlow Creek Convention Center. Chandeliers cast warm light over round tables draped in sterling blue linen. Centerpieces of winter white roses and frosted pine cones gleamed under crystal glass. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne that my parents could no longer afford but purchased anyway, because appearances were the last currency they had left to spend. 400 guests filled the room, former employees, current employees terrified of losing their jobs, local politicians, journalists from the regional business press, creditors pretending to be competitors dressed in sympathy black, and every member of the extended Sterling clan who could claim relation to the dynasty. I wore a navy gown I had rented because buying felt inappropriate given my parents' finances. Ryan wore the same suit he had worn to our engagement announcement, the one my mother had called adequate for neighborhood block parties. When she thought I wasn't listening, we sat at table 12, near the back of the room, surrounded by my second cousin on my mother's side and her husband who worked in insurance and hadn't spoken to my father in 3 years. The evening proceeded according to the program printed on ivory. Cardstock, cocktails, silent auction, dinner service featuring filet mignon that I knew my father had charged to a personal credit card because the corporate account was frozen. Speeches from 2 local charity directors thanking the for their years of support. Speeches that carried unintentional, eulogistic weight given the circumstances. My mother sat at the head table, smiling a smile that looked carved from porcelain. nodding at acquaintances, pretending nothing was wrong. My father sat beside her, pale, thinner than I had ever seen him. Running his thumb along the edge of his water glass in a nervous rhythm I recognized from childhood. The same gesture he made before delivering bad news. At 9:15, the MC, a local radio personality with too much teeth and too little tact, took the microphone and announced it was time for the main event. Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to Mr. Arthur Sterling, CEO of Sterling Manufacturing Industries, who has a very important announcement regarding the future of this beloved company and the hundreds of families it supports. Applause scattered through the room. Uncertain, polite, edged with pity. My father stood, straightened his tie, cleared his throat. The microphone squeaked. He began to speak, his voice thick with emotion I had never heard him display publicly. Friends, colleagues, employees of Sterling, tonight I stand before you at a crossroads. As many of you know, this company has faced challenges in recent months that have tested every ounce of strength I possess. The economic landscape has shifted. Markets have turned, and despite our best efforts, he paused, swallowed. We have reached a point where, absent a miracle, Sterling Manufacturing will close its doors permanently. Before the new year, a murmur rippled through the ballroom. Someone gasped. My mother covered her mouth with her hand. From somewhere near the kitchen doors, I heard muffled crying. An employee, probably, realizing the end was officially here. My father continued. However, tonight, I am honored to share with you that a miracle has, in fact, arrived. The murmuring intensified. Speculative glances exchanged. Reporters leaned forward. Camera phones raised. 3 weeks ago, representatives from an investment firm contacted us expressing interest in acquiring Sterling Manufacturing, not to dismantle it, not to strip it for parts or export those jobs overseas, but to operate it, to modernize it, to save every single job, to honor the legacy my father built and I have tried to protect. The room erupted, not in celebration, yet in disbelief, in desperate hope, in cautious optimism that felt almost painful to witness. My father was smiling now, real smiles, tears tracking down his cheeks unchecked. Tonight, I have the extraordinary privilege of introducing to you the representative of Apex Climate Solutions, the holding company that has completed the acquisition of Sterling Manufacturing effective as of 4 o'clock this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new owner of Sterling Manufacturing. The ballroom doors opened, footsteps, clean, confident, deliberate. A figure emerged from the backstage curtain, stepping into the spotlight, into the glare of 400 pairs of eyes, into the threshold of a moment that would redefine everything my family thought they understood about power, worth, and the man they had dismissed as nothing more than a fixer of broken air conditioners. Ryan Miller adjusted his cuff, smoothed the lapel of his suit, and walked toward my father with the easy grace of someone who had walked this path 1,000 times in rehearsal rooms nobody knew existed. My father's smile froze. His eyes widened. His mouth fell open. For one eternal second, the entire convention center held its breath. Then Ryan reached the podium, shook my father's hand, a handshake that felt to my father, I later learned, like grasping a live wire, and turned to face 400 people who had just witnessed his arrival, not as the AC repairman they expected, but as the savior they desperately needed. And the standing ovation began. Ryan raised his hand for quiet. It came faster than expected, because everyone wanted to hear what came next. There is one more thing, he said. His eyes scanned the room briefly before settling back on my father. I want to be clear about why I made this investment. I did not buy this company because the numbers made sense, though they do. After restructuring, I did not buy it because I needed another asset for my portfolio. I bought it because 6 months ago, at a Sunday dinner where I was told I was inadequate, unqualified, and unworthy of the daughter of this family, I looked at Maya's father and saw a good man drowning, under bad market conditions and worse luck, and I decided then and there that I would find a way to save what he built. Not for profit, not for recognition, but because a family that produces someone as remarkable as Maya deserves to keep their dignity intact. Even if they don't always recognize dignity when they see it. He stepped back from the microphone, handed it to my father, whose hands shook as he took it, sat down in the empty chair beside mine at table 12, took my hand under the tablecloth, and smiled that dimpled smile, the one I fell in love with 3 years ago. While 400 people tried simultaneously to process exactly what had just happened to the social order of Harlow Creek, Ohio, what followed the next 20 minutes remains the strangest sequence of events I have ever witnessed at any gathering anywhere, ever. The press swarmed the stage, but Ryan declined interviews, saying only that Mr. Sterling would remain CEO and managing director indefinitely, that details would follow, and that no further questions would be answered that evening. Employees lined up to shake my father's hand, many of them hugging him, crying, thanking him, telling him they had known somehow that things would turn around. My mother sat frozen at the head table, her champagne untouched, her expression cycling through emotions too fast to track: pride, embarrassment, fury, disbelief, landing eventually on something that looked uncomfortably close to shame. When the formal program concluded and guests began migrating toward the dessert stations, my father finally moved. He walked slowly toward our table, navigating between chairs and people as if underwater. He stopped in front of Ryan, stared down at him. Ryan stood up to meet his gaze, shoulders leveled, though he was 3 inches shorter than my father. "You," my father said. His voice cracked on the single syllable. "Your Apex Climate Solutions," Ryan said quietly. "Yes, sir. How?" My father's voice rose. "How is this possible? You fix air conditioners. You drive a truck with a dent in the door. Your company has 3 employees. 3. He was shaken now. Anger, humiliation, relief, impossible to tell. "Dad," I started, reaching for his arm. "Maya, let him finish," Ryan said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. He looked up at my father. "Mr. Sterling, I do fix air conditioners. That's what I love doing. Working with my hands, solving problems, making things comfortable for people who can't afford the fancy solutions you're accustomed to. That business is real. Those 3 employees are real men with families who depend on me. But what you didn't know, and what I didn't share, because I needed to earn your respect on my own terms first, without money buying it, is that 9 years ago, when I was 19 and just starting out in trade school, I patented a thermal exchange technology for residential HVAC systems that reduced energy consumption by 40% compared to standard units. I licensed that patent to 3 major manufacturers. The royalties funded investments I made carefully, quietly, through holding companies that kept my name out of public records. I didn't want the money to change who I was or how people treated me. I especially didn't want the woman I someday hoped to marry to choose me because of what I owned instead of who I am. My father sat down hard in the empty chair beside him. Someone behind us gasped. My mother appeared at his elbow, gripping it, whispering something frantic that sounded like $7 million. And how did we not know? And the wedding, oh God. The wedding, Ryan, wasn't finished. I'm worth considerably more than $7 million, Mrs. Sterling. But the number doesn't matter. What matters is that tonight, When Arthur stood here preparing to say goodbye to 53 years of legacy, nobody stepped forward except me, the son-in-law you despised, the tradesman you insulted, the boy from community college you assumed couldn't possibly understand the weight of responsibility you carry. He leaned forward. I understood. Every day for 18 months, I watched you struggle. I ran the numbers on Sterling when you weren't looking. I researched suppliers, markets, competitors. I hired the consultants who streamlined your operations, ones you thought Maya found for you. Because she mentioned them at dinner one night, they worked for me. Everything that saved this company in the past 6 months came through channels I created, specifically to support your family while protecting your pride. My father covered his face with both hands. When he lowered them, his eyes were wet. Why? He whispered. Why would you do this after everything we said to you? Ryan looked at me, then back at my father. Because Maya loves you. And I love Maya. And the man who raises a woman capable of loving someone like she loves deserves better than poverty in his old age. Deserves better than the humiliation of losing everything he built. Deserves to look at his son-in-law and feel pride instead of disappointment. I couldn't fix how you treated me, Arthur. That was your choice to make. But I could fix whether your factory survived. So I did. The car ride home that night was silent except for the sound of my father breathing in the back seat, irregular and shaky, and my mother's occasional sniffles from the passenger seat where she sat rigidly facing forward, refusing to look at anyone. Ryan drove. I sat beside him, his hand on my knee, warm and steady. The city lights streaked past the windows, blurring into rivers of gold and white against the December dark. Nobody spoke until we pulled into my parents' driveway and Ryan cut the engine. Then my father said, very quietly, "Come inside, please, both of you." It wasn't a command. It was something else entirely. Something broken and tentative and hopeful in a way I had never heard from him before. We sat in the formal living room, the one with the antique furniture that was never used. My mother poured whiskey without asking if anyone wanted any, poured 3 glasses, handed one to my father, and left the third sitting on the coffee table in front of Ryan, an offering she couldn't quite bring herself to deliver personally. Ryan picked it up anyway, nodded at her, thanked her. She flinched as if he'd slapped her, which, given the history between them, perhaps he had in some metaphysical way. My father leaned forward, elbows on knees, glass dangling between his fingers. "Ryan," he said, "I called you a tradesman. I told you that sterling women don't marry down. I treated you like furniture at dinners for 18 months. I gave your job application to the loading dock. I refused to attend your engagement announcement because I had a business conflict that was actually a golf game." He took a drink, set the glass down. "And you saved my life, my employees' lives, my legacy, everything I ever cared about. Why didn't you tell me any of it? Why let me humiliate you?" Ryan sipped his whiskey, set it down, thought for a long moment. "Because," he said slowly, "if you knew what I was worth, you would have smiled at me differently at that first dinner. You would have shaken my hand harder. You would have approved of Maya marrying me because of the money, not despite the lack of it. And I wanted Dai needed to know that someday, when you found out the truth, it would hurt. I wanted you to remember every cruel word you said, every slight, every dismissal, and realize that you had judged a book by its cover while the contents were busy writing a chapter where you got saved by the last person on earth you expected." My mother made a small sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. My father stared at the floor. Then he looked up, and his eyes were red-rimmed but clear. "Ryan," he said, "I am sorry. I am sorry for the dinner, for the country club comments, for ignoring you at holidays, for assuming your value could be measured by the cost of your shoes or the letters after your name. I was wrong. I was arrogant. And you had every right to watch me drown tonight instead of throwing me a rope. But you threw it anyway. Ryan nodded. Accepted it. Did not soften it with false modesty or deflection. Your daughter is the best thing that ever happened to me, Arthur. I would have saved the factory for her even if you'd spat in my face every day for the rest of my life. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You protect the things they care about, even the things they don't take good care of themselves. He stood up, extended his hand to my father. Now, about that wedding. Is June still good for you? Or do we need to discuss rescheduling? My father stared at the hand, reached out, gripped it, and for the first time in 18 months, he shook Ryan's hand like he meant it. Like he was shaking the hand of an equal. Like he was meeting his son-in-law for the very first time. The weeks following the gala transformed my family in ways that felt both miraculous and deeply uncomfortable. The news spread fast, not just locally, but nationally, picked up by business journals, intrigued by the narrative of the anonymous HVAC contractor-turned-billionaire-philanthropist, saving a manufacturing town from economic collapse. Ryan granted exactly one interview to Forbes, conducted in the parking lot of his shop while he changed the oil in his Ford pickup truck, explaining his philosophy about keeping feet on the ground and values authentic regardless of net worth. The article went viral. Miller Climate Control's phone rang off the hook for weeks. Ryan turned down every expansion offer, every acquisition bid, every request to franchise his model. He kept his 3 original employees, kept fixing air conditioners for a little, old ladies who couldn't afford the big companies, and kept coming home to me every evening smelling of solder flux and sweat and satisfaction. That was the Ryan I fell in love with. That was the Ryan I was going to marry. The money changed nothing about him. It changed everything about how others saw him. My parents' adjustment period wasn't easy. My mother shifted between silence, constant apologies, and attempts to involve herself in Ryan's financial decisions. Ryan handled her with patience, setting firm boundaries while accepting her efforts to change. My father's transformation was quieter. 3 weeks after the gala, he visited Ryan's shop wearing jeans instead of a suit. He watched Ryan repair equipment for customers, asked questions, and spent the afternoon talking engineering with him. By the end of the visit, they were sharing sandwiches and discussing compressors and like old friends. It was the most genuine conversation I had ever seen my father have outside his social circle. Wedding planning resumed in January under new rules. My mother wanted 300 guests. Ryan compromised at 150. With half the seats reserved for Sterling employees and their families, formal traditions gave way to personal touches. The string quartet became an acoustic guitarist who was one of Ryan's closest friends. My mother resisted at first, then gradually accepted that she no longer controlled everything. The bigger lesson was impossible to ignore. Worth was not determined by family name, status, or wealth. It was determined by character, competence, and the courage to do what was right when it came at a cost. By March, my father stepped back from daily operations at Sterling Manufacturing and accepted a board position. Ryan took over leadership while continuing to run Miller Climate Control. Productivity increased, profits improved, and employee morale reached record levels. One year, the union representative even sent Ryan a Christmas card calling him the best boss none of us saw coming. Despite Ryan's wealth, we kept our small apartment. We liked that we had built our life there together before anyone knew what he was worth. The leaky bathroom and old kitchen cabinets reminded us that authenticity mattered more than perfection. The wedding took place on the first Saturday in June at the Botanical Gardens, where Ryan proposed. Beneath a canopy of roses and lights, We exchanged vows surrounded by people who truly cared about us. My father walked me down the aisle. Through tears, he whispered, "I'm sorry for everything." Before placing my hand in Ryan's, my mother cried too, though she later blamed allergies. Ryan's vows were simple. He promised to protect what I love, respect what I build, and remember that the person who fixes the problem matters more than the person who takes credit for it today. I sit on the porch of the house we chose to keep, watching Ryan teach our son, Arthur, how to hold a wrench. Inside, our daughter Eleanor sleeps peacefully. The life we built isn't perfect, but it's real. If your family judges people by money, status, or job titles, remember this: worth is not proven by applause. It is proven by showing up, staying when things get difficult, and loving without conditions. Ryan Miller fixed air conditioners for a living. He also helped repair a broken family, not because anyone deserved it, but because he believed in helping people when they needed it most. My parents refused to attend my engagement. My husband bought their factory and saved their legacy. My mother learned humility. My father learned respect. I learned that the person you choose shapes the life you live. Choose the one who fixes problems instead of pointing them out. Choose the one who leaves ego at the door. Choose the one who values people more than appearances. This is Maya Miller, formerly Sterling, signing off from Legacy Revenge. Trust the quiet ones. Fix what's broken. Love without conditions. And never underestimate the person in work boots.